Thank you so much. Current research shows that it takes 7 seconds on average for people to make a good first impression. For most people, well, for some people, that's as short as 0.9 seconds. And so I know that, once you get past that first impression barrier, it takes 1.5, 4 minutes to decide whether you're going to like someone or whether you're going to trust them. And for some of you, I'm already past that. I look like Mr. Monopoly or Dr. Robotnik or Kaiser Wilhelm II, not necessarily people who inspire a lot of trust or confidence. But for some of you, you're like, all right, whatever. I have roughly 3.5 minutes left to make some level of good first impression to get past that trust barrier. So let me start by just saying thank you. Your guys' church has been a great supporter of the Great Commission Fund, great supporters of us and our ministry. Thank you for your prayers for us. Thank you for your support for us. It really means a lot when we see the support coming from you, and you guys have blessed us over the years. It's been a blessing to the point where my wife is back for 2 months, and she'll fly back to Berlin a week from tomorrow with our son Joshua to get him started in school again in Berlin. And that meant that we only had 7 weeks that we were traveling churches together, and Battle Lake was one of the churches that we really wanted to visit together. She's really sorry that she can't be here today. She woke up Friday with a splitting headache, migraine level, basically couldn't get out of bed on Friday. It was really bad again yesterday. And so we put off traveling as long as possible to see if she would get better, but it just wasn't good enough for her to be able to be here. But she wishes she could be and sends her greetings with me to you. And so, thank you for your support and for your love of our family. Maybe another way I can win some points is letting you guys know that this place on planet Earth, not Battle Lake, but this district is a place that we call home. My dad was in the Air Force when I was growing up. We moved around a lot. Last duty assignment for him was Minot, North Dakota at Minot Air Force Base. I graduated from Minot High, attended Minot State University studying computer science for a couple of years. Then I transferred to Crown College, and that's where I met Alyssa. We got married and stayed in the district. We actually got married in orientation. We didn't get married, but we met each other in orientation day. So I don't know who was in Noah's group yesterday, but anyway, we stayed in the district, started our family here. I was the youth pastor at Maple Plain Community Church for 6 years and lead pastor at Staples Alliance Church for 10. Was licensed in this district and then ordained in this district. We were commissioned to go overseas from this district. We call this part of the world home. Another reason, I forgot I put this slide in there. This is my family. This is our family just over 10 years ago on the left-hand side, right before we left. And then on the right-hand side was our family this last January. We were together again in Berlin. The times where we're together as a family of 5 are fewer and far between now, with kids living on 2 continents, but that is my family. Another reason, hopefully you can maybe like us as a family, is in our family, one of us plays this game where you sit in a circle and talk about ducks and then chase someone who whacks you on the head correctly. I won't tell you which one, but in our house there are people who play duck, duck, goose and duck, duck, gray duck. So one of us plays the game, right? I'm also not here to preach at you this morning. I just want to share some of what's happening in our lives. I don't pretend to have it all figured out. We showed up in Berlin on July 13th, 2012. Been in ministry for 16 years. Thought I had ministry figured out. We landed after a long day of travel with all 3 kids. It's a good start. We had 12 suitcases and a guitar. We crashed at a friend's apartment overnight. And when I look back at it now, it was probably sometime in May of 2012 where I last felt reasonably confident that I knew what I was doing. We got settled in a neighborhood, went to language school, learned German for 2 years, helped the church that we were a part of. Then as we finished language school, the church we were working with asked us to start a ministry center downtown Berlin. And with the help of the Alliance, we rented some space right across the street from where the church was meeting on Sunday mornings. We started to get it set up for children's ministries and for other ministries of the church. The biggest problem we were facing was that the people from the church all lived outside of the center of Berlin and had so much going on in their lives that it was hard for them to travel downtown to get involved in some of the activities we really wanted them to help with in the church. We really wanted it to be their ministry center, not ours. But we also didn't want the space to sit empty, and so we started to walk around our community, and we noticed that there were more than 30 art galleries within walking distance. And so we decided, well, let's start exhibiting art, which sounds really easy and really glamorous until you start doing it. Having art on the walls during the week and turning the space over every weekend for children's ministries is a lot of work. We also found that exhibiting art is a lot more challenging than just hanging pictures on the wall. We needed help, and luckily we got it in the shape of a German artist who was very skeptical towards faith, had no problem sharing her mind, but was really willing to help us do the gallery work well. And yeah, there we go. Over the next 2.5 years, we worked together. We held 17 exhibits with more than 24 artists from 20 different countries. We were Gallery of the Month for one Berlin art magazine twice. We had built a great artistic community, and were also involved in a church plant that the Alliance had been partnered with for almost 10 years. And then shortly before we came home in 2017, everything fell apart. We were preparing to leave, and the church we thought was ready to lead itself without overseas workers being involved, which is what the Alliance loves to do, help raise up leaders and turn the ministry over to them. But the church lost its lease on the building they were renting, and that caused tension in the church. And then we as Alliance workers were stepping out from being involved, and that caused tension in the church. And then there was some vision conflict between the pastor and some of the congregants. And the end result of all of that was that the church plant failed. They had been paying about 25% of the costs on our rental space, so we had to shut the gallery down as well. Most of the people in the church landed well in new congregations, but for us, getting ready to come back on home assignment, we really felt like we had lost a big portion of what we had invested ourselves over the last 5 years in. It's kind of the opposite of the Midas touch. Instead of everything turning to gold, we felt we were leaving with everything having turned to dust. But at the same time that this was happening, the Alliance had responded heroically to the 2015 Arabic Spring and the more than 60,000, mostly Syrian refugees that had come to Berlin. Longtime workers from the Middle East had come to Berlin and helped launch a ministry center reaching out to Arabic-speaking refugees. On the left in the picture there is some of the short-term housing that the city of Berlin had erected for refugees. They're shipping containers that are converted into apartment space. And on the right are some of the people that we gathered in late 2015, leading into early 2016 to help us figure out how we could begin to do ministry well to these refugees. This couple, Daryl Fennessy, is in the back of that picture, had served for a long time in the Middle East, came and spent their last 2 years of ministry in Berlin. They retired in early 2018. And after our last home assignment, Alyssa and I returned back to Berlin in July of 2018 as the only workers focusing on German church planting. And we were asked to lead a new team called the Berlin Arab German team. Had ministries in 2 languages. We didn't know anyone on the team when we landed. A month after we landed, another family joined us. 1 year later, another family was added to the mix. 6 months later, a single lady joined the team. 6 months after that, 2 new families joined us in Berlin, and we quickly grew to a team of more than 30 people with no common language. Our Syrian pastor could not speak English. Most of us could not speak Arabic. And everyone except Alyssa and I and the Syrian pastor could not speak or were learning German. And so every week I was writing emails to our team in 2 languages. When we had team meetings, they were taking place in 3 languages. And we just kind of stumbled this lurching, growing ship along. We had a 5-year strategic review 4 months after we came back in July of 2018. And literally nothing that had been in place 5 years before was still happening in Berlin. And most of what we had planned for was no longer feasible. The Arabic ministry was struggling, so Alyssa and I were asked to step back from German church planting, help the Arabic project survive, and then, just as it happened here in Berlin, COVID hit as well. And it was a rough couple of years of ministry. In the midst of all of this, though, God was faithful. The Arabic church continued to grow. God continued to grow our team, and we were able to launch some German-speaking house churches. In 2018, our team was realizing we had a lot of short-term teams that were coming and wanting to visit the site and get involved in ministry. We wanted to do ministry with those short-term teams well, so we invited Envision to come and launch a site in Berlin. And in March of 2019, as the international site developer was there on site and explaining, hey, this is what we want to happen, this is who an international site coordinator would look like, Alyssa and I realized that he was really describing our perfect position. It was like the match between onboarding people and youth ministry and pastoral ministry, all kind of bundled into one spot. And so in the middle of COVID, April of 2021, we launched Envision Berlin. Why am I explaining all of that? Not just so that you say, oh, now Mike's this relatable guy, but also hopefully to say that in many ways, Alyssa and I are still trying to figure out what we're talking about this year in the Alliance when it comes to missions, and that is how to be present. It's really a challenging concept, I think, in the church today. It seems that it's becoming more and more challenging for us as church people to really be present in our communities. Sometimes it's because there's differences in beliefs and differences in values, and sometimes it just makes it feel like we don't have a place where we belong anymore. And there have been a lot of hot-button issues that have come up over the last couple of years, and sometimes, I don't know if this is true for you, but it's often true for me. It's uncomfortable even in church meetings and family dinners like Thanksgiving or Christmas. Sometimes feel like you're navigating a minefield when you're talking about different issues. Is that true for you guys as well? And so when it comes to a topic like be present, it feels a little bit loaded. Because we'd love a place where we could be fully ourselves, fully present, fully known and real and transparent, but the thought of what that would take is sometimes really terrifying. Our family lives in one of the most atheistic geographical regions on planet Earth. Some German church historians claim that northeast Germany was never really reached by the gospel. It was occupied by some of the most fierce barbarian warriors of the world, and even the mighty Roman Empire could never conquer the Slavic Gauls who lived in this area called Germania on the map above me, northeast of the Elbe River. In fact, crusades were launched to either kill or convert the Slavic people in the area we now call home. And even though churches were established, even though Martin Luther launched the Reformation from Germany, one could argue that churches planted in violence and force do little to actually impact the hearts of people. Berlin was also the leader in early atheistic thought. There was a growing atheistic philosophy that called Berlin home in the late 1800s. Not so much, as I was sharing in Sunday school earlier, out of violent resistance to God, but more questioning whether God was relevant or needed in the lives of modern people. So today in the city of Berlin, fewer than 1% of people attend church. More than 65% of Berliners say they have no spiritual beliefs, known to statisticians as nones, N-O-N-E-S. This number, N-O-N-E-S, I can English. This number rises radically when somebody leaves the city of Berlin, enters into rural Germany. We have colleagues working in northeast Germany where that number is closer to 85%. 85% of people who say they have no spiritual beliefs. These numbers, as I shared in Sunday school this morning, are also in the rise in the U.S., which means I really believe that we have to figure out how to do incarnational ministry better if we're going to have a lasting impact. How did Jesus do this? How did Jesus live an incarnational life? I want to take us to the Gospel of John, John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. The Gospel of John is an interesting one in that it doesn't start with the life or the birth of Jesus like Matthew and Luke do. It doesn't start with the ministry of Jesus like Mark does. It starts with the existence of Jesus before he ever showed up on planet Earth. One of the most poetic, beautiful passages of Scripture, John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him. And apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. Life was in him. And that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man named John who was sent from God. He came as a witness to testify about the light so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. The true light, who gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was created through him, yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, he gave them the right to be children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. The Word became flesh and took up residence among us. We observed his glory, the glory of the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Could spend weeks digging into that passage. I only have one. So we're going to go right to verse 14 and focus in on the word and the phrase took up residence among us. The word that John uses here, word, logos, is very deliberately chosen. He's writing as an old man in the city of Ephesus, a center of philosophical thought, and he picks a word that had been gradually evolving throughout Greek philosophical history and Jewish history, and he combines all of those meanings and calls Jesus the Word and focuses on his existence from eternity instead of on his birth. He introduces us to Jesus as the revealer of God and God in reality. And he says that this Word came and dwelt among us, that the Word took on human form and took up residency among us. As language learners, we learn pretty quickly that there are some phrases that are really difficult to translate. They're challenging to translate literally. Some of them make sense if you understand the context. For example, there's a German phrase that says, Ich verstehe nur Bahnhof. Literally translated, it means I only understand train station. If you can picture yourself standing on a crowded train platform and the announcer comes on and talks about the train that's coming into the station, and all you understand at the end of his long sentence is the word station. Ich verstehe nur Bahnhof. We would translate it as, and Germans use it to say, I really didn't understand what you were saying. Another phrase is, das ist mir Wurst. Literally translated, it means that's sausage to me. Germans use the phrase, as my language teacher explained it, das ist mir Wurst means it doesn't matter what side of the sausage you start eating from, it all tastes the same. So Germans use the phrase to say it doesn't really matter to me. So you ask someone, hey, where would you like to go today for dinner? And they'd say, das ist mir Wurst, doesn't matter to me. Another phrase, ich hab keinen Bock, means I have no goat. Nobody knows where this phrase came from. Makes zero sense, but Germans use the phrase to mean I don't have any desire to do that. So, hey, how'd you like to go play soccer today? Ich hab keinen Bock. I have no desire to go and do that. Literal translations don't really help us understand the meaning, and sometimes that happens in Bible translation as well. For example, we translate the Word became flesh and took up residence among us. The literal translation there is that he pitched his tent among us. Such a fascinating phrase. And there's a variety of reasons for it. And one of the reasons I find it fascinating is because it reminds me of the first place of worship that God instructed Moses to build. So as the Israelites came out of Egypt, God instructed Moses to instruct the skilled craftsmen and artisans to build a place of worship, to make all of the instruments that were involved in the various worship rituals. And this place of worship was called the tabernacle, which is literally just a tent. And the first time that this tabernacle was pitched, The presence of God came and dwelt so mightily inside of this tent that Moses couldn't even go into it. And then this presence of God became the cloud over the tabernacle that became the way the Israelites were instructed to move. When the cloud moved, the Israelites would move. When the cloud stayed, the Israelites would stay. And so when John said that Jesus pitched his tent among us, it's most likely a reference back to the tabernacle. It's a physical tent, Jesus' body, in which the entire presence of God came and lived among us. Paul later talks about our human bodies with this tent image as well. But he also uses the image of us being clay jars. Maybe you remember the reference in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 where Paul says, "For God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ." Then he says, "Now we have this treasure in clay jars so that this extraordinary power may be from God and not from us." Both the tent and clay jars are relatively fragile vessels. The tabernacle, even with all of the gold-plated worship instruments and the elaborate weavings into the tent, was still just a tent, and a clay pot is still just a clay pot without the presence of God. There's nothing amazing about either. There's nothing amazing about a tent, unless you really like camping. I mean, really, really like camping. And there's nothing amazing about the clay pot in and of itself. The beauty of the vessel is that it holds the presence of God. The beauty of the vessel is that it holds the treasure. And when God pitched his tent among us in the word Jesus, Paul also says we bring the treasure of the light of God in our clay vessels to the places where God plants us and places us. So we had to learn in our ministry in Germany that it wasn't our experience, it wasn't our linguistic ability, it wasn't our wonderful giftings or fantastic knowledge that God needed. It was simply our presence. In fact, it wasn't until we really started to recognize ourselves as clay pots that the treasure of Jesus really began to be displayed in us. That's why Paul goes on to say, in our weakness, he is strong. We are most present when we're least concerned about our appearance or our competence. Which brings me maybe to a question for you as a church and you as a follower of Jesus. What does it mean for you, what does it mean for us to live among people? To really take up our residence among them? To pitch our tents in the communities where God has planted us? From my experience, it meant I had to be less concerned about being competent and more about being concerned and kind about the people in my community. It was less about the flair of the way I could present myself and more about just being there for people. And long-term presence is really important in Berlin. One night, there was a knock on my apartment door, really more of a banging, and as I opened the door, Philippe was there. And Philippe told me quickly in his heavily French accented German that his baby was not breathing. And so I rushed to help. Alyssa came quickly behind me, and by the time we had arrived, little baby Timmy was breathing again, but we stayed for a bit. We prayed for Laura and Philippe. We continued to check in with them. They lived right across the hall from us in our apartment building. After we had moved in 2012, been there for about 3 years, Philippe and Laura finally invited us over for dinner, saying, "Well, you've been here for 3 years now. I guess you're staying around long enough for us to get to know you better." We had talked in the hallway before that. We had joked about how hard it is to learn German. Philippe is French, and Laura is German. And German relationships just move really slowly. And shortly after this incident with baby Timmy, we had to leave for home assignment in 2017, and Timmy continued to have problems. It was determined that he had some very serious medical conditions. He spent most of the year we were gone in the hospital. His long-term prognosis was not at all good. One day after we had returned, Alyssa had the chance to hold him while we were at another neighbor's home. She rocked little Timmy and sang, Timmy was mostly non-responsive, sang "Jesus Loves Me" to him quietly. And Timmy just lit up. Smile so big on his face, much to the surprise of Laura. Laura took Timmy with her on a vacation to Portugal. Philippe stayed in Berlin to work, and shockingly, while she was gone, her son fell ill, and he died there. And once again, Philippe was knocking on my apartment door. He couldn't go and join them in Portugal. He needed to stay and make arrangements for this inter-country transfer of a young person who had passed away. I went over, sat with him, wept with him, as he was involved in making the arrangements for this multi-country funeral and transfer. I ordered him a French Bible, had it overnighted. The next day delivered it to him. We sat again together, gave him some Psalms to read. Over the next several days, we continued to spend time together. I'd give him more Psalms to read. We'd get together and read, and eventually Laura was able to return. Timmy's body was sent back to Berlin, and they had a private funeral ceremony for him. And then Philippe started to attend our house church. Not every Sunday, but regularly we would meet together as well. Laura did once, but she was raised in former East Germany and really struggles with religion, and for a while their relationship really struggled. I would meet with Philippe and talk to him about grace, talk to him about forgiveness, talk to him about how extraordinary it is that God forgives us no matter what we have done. He continued to read his Bible. They're back together now. Laura has another child. It's complicated. They're raising him together. Philippe is on the road to faith. He would sometimes describe himself as a person who sees faith as important. In one conversation, he said, "Yeah, it's hard for Laura. She doesn't believe like we do." Is he a committed Christ follower? Not yet. But he's on his way. He's on this discipleship journey. And it's a journey that we're able to be part of because we're present. Not because of any great gospel presentation that we made to them right after we moved in, but because we lived across the hall from them now for 10 years. And we interact, and we relate with them, and we're involved with them in the life of their children. And this is presence. And this is really something that all of us can do. It's something that can happen here as well. And so again, kind of back to the question, what would it mean for you to follow the example of Jesus and pitch your tent in your neighborhood? What would it mean for you personally to take up residence? Not just to live, but to really, truly take up residence in the community here. And what would it mean for the church? Because that's really what I think we need in our churches today. We need communities to know that Jesus loves them and to have them see that, sometimes more than just hear that, in us and through us. The passage in John 1:14 ends with Jesus, the Word, through whom everything in all creation was made, dwelling among us, and John says, full of grace and truth. And that would be one of the biggest honors of my life, if the people in the community that we've been living in for 10 years in Berlin now would say that about us. So let me share some ways that we're doing that in Berlin. We do community gardening, as I explained in the first service. There's a group of people in our neighborhood that get together in the first service in Sunday school, the group of people that we get together with once a month in our local park, and we weed and we rake and we sweep together. There's a Living Advents calendar where businesses and people in the community get together to sing and serve, and we've opened up our apartment for people in our community to come to that. We have big show windows in our new space in Weissensee, and so we host gallery events through those show windows, and we invite people to come and to enjoy art. We do English classes. Up in the city of Waren is where several of our colleagues are working, and they do an English corner and English classes. They've done English camps, and there's a team in Berlin that's starting to offer this as well. This English day camp is something 1 week during spring break up in Waren. The team there helps the after-school care program run a week of English day camp, and it's been so healthy in building relationships that when some of our teammates were on home assignment several years ago, this after-school care program said, hey, we want to come and do a day camp for your church in the U.S. So this group of Germans who aren't believers decided that they were going to come and run a program for one of the churches in the United States, came back and did a German day camp for the church just because they felt so much connection and were so thankful for the churches that had come and been doing this program for them. We do refugee work. In 2015, the Alliance responded in Berlin by starting the Arabic ministry and the latest refugee movement from Ukraine. The team up in Waren has responded really well to that. They started going with van and trailer full of supplies from their community to a city in Poland where a lot of the refugees were coming to, and they would deliver these supplies and then come back with the van full of refugee families to settle them in their community. So the community was opening up their vacation apartments, spare rooms in their homes, and settling in these Ukrainian refugees into their community. And the Waren church, started by our Alliance workers, is now full of more than half Ukrainian refugees. So much so that the Alliance has taken a family that was serving in Ukraine and has now moved them up to Waren for the year to be able to help with translation work and help people get settled there. We do window concerts from our gallery space. As I shared in Sunday school, one person said we usually only hear sirens on our street, but now we're hearing music. We do art exhibits. They're all things that we're doing, trying to find a way to share the love of Jesus very practically in our communities, most of the time starting by just being there, by pitching our tent in their communities. So what about truth? That's one way we can say, well, we're doing that in grace, but what does it mean to be there in grace and truth? One of the ways we view this is that really the work that we do in Berlin is building bridges that can bear the weight of the gospel. So as we get involved in people's lives, we invite them to ask questions. We share with them truths about why we're there. I introduce myself very openly as a pastor. We invite them to our house churches. We give them opportunities to hear about Jesus. So again, back to here, what does it mean for us to have grace and truth in the communities where God has placed us? What would it mean for you to really pitch your tent in this community? What would it mean for Battle Lake Alliance Church to be present in the community of Battle Lake? I'm not saying that you're not. I'm always saying that God is always giving us new ideas to be present for the people around us. And what would that mean for you in the coming year to be even more present than you are now? How would God have you minister and impact the people you're ministering to? And then how would God have you support the work of missions being done around the world? In Acts chapter 1:8, Jesus said, "You will be my witnesses when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth." Jerusalem is the community, the area where God has planted us, and then it goes out in concentric circles outside of that. And I love that Jesus didn't say, "You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, or the uttermost parts of the earth." That he said Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. One of the things that we love being part of this Acts 1:8 family called the Christian and Missionary Alliance is we know that there are people in communities like Battle Lake who are reaching out to people who don't know Jesus here. When we were getting ready to leave Staples, Minnesota, one of the things that was hardest for us was knowing that there were a lot of people in Staples that didn't know Jesus yet. But we were able to leave knowing that there was a congregation of people that were reaching out to the community. We were going into a city, in the place where our office space is now, there's 40,000 people. Before we came there were only 3 churches in this community of 40,000 people. There's a lack of gospel access. So God is calling us to be present there as well. And there's ways that your church can be involved in that. And one of the ways your church has faithfully been involved in that is through praying for international work going on through the Alliance and other ministries around the world. And I just want to say thank you for that. If I had more time, I would take it. But if I had more time, I would be able to talk to you even about what God has done as direct answers to prayers, to the prayer letter that we send out in the last 4 months. Just time after time, where God has come through in ways where we would say there's no way that's possible, but God has done it. And we know that that's because people are praying for us. I also like to encourage churches to be involved in giving to the ministry that's happening in their community. What's happening here through your church needs to be supported by you. Financially, the ministry can't continue if people aren't sacrificially giving. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for making sure my friend Derek has food on his table. But I also want to thank you for giving to the work that God is doing around the world through the Alliance. Thanks for your gifts to the Great Commission Fund that supports ministry happening from more than 700 workers in more than 60 different countries around the world. And thanks also for your churches giving directly to us. It's really helpful for us. It's also super encouraging when we see money coming through and it says from Battle Lake Alliance Church. And we can say, wow, God is moving in that church, and it's a blessing to us. I also want to talk to you about sending. The last one is going, but people can't go unless they're sent. And what I've found in a lot of instances is that God has a habit of sending the people we most want to hold on to. I think of when the first missionaries, when Paul and Barnabas were sent. And they were the leaders of the church. And as the leaders of the church prayed, God said, send out Paul and Barnabas. And so if we're going to continue to be a denomination that is seeing the least reached peoples in the world be reached, it's only going to happen when we as churches are sending people. And sometimes that means that we're recognizing God's calling, and sometimes that comes with a sense of releasing them to follow God as well. The people we most want to hold on to, being open-handed with not just our resources, but our people. And the last challenge is to go. I remember when I was 12 years old, I was sitting in the back of a small Alliance church as a missionary started talking about the need for people to be sent and the need for people to go. And I felt like my heart was pounding out of my chest because I knew in that moment God was speaking to me. That he was saying, Mike, I want your life to be committed to full-time ministry for me. And the great thing about the God we serve throughout the Bible is that it's not age dependent. God does not just call 12-year-olds sitting in a missions conference in a church. Moses was 80. God calls. And our response when God calls is to be obedient and to go. So I want to put that challenge out to you as well, that it could be that you're hearing this morning and you're thinking, okay, God, how do I become more present in the community that I'm planted in? And it could be that you're here and you're hearing God say, I want you to go for me. And if that's true, I know Derek would love to talk with you after church. You can come and speak with me as well. I want to give you the opportunity to just be obedient to the call that God is placing on your life. I have one more slide. I have two more slides. This slide is a location of all of the Envision sites around the world that if you want to come and serve short term, whether it's 10-day trip or 1 to 11-month internship or two years of ministry preparation, Envision is all over the world serving a lot of times alongside other Alliance teams. You talk to me if you're interested in serving with Envision. And here's a QR code if you're all fancy schmancy and you know how to use that on your phone. You can scan that in and you can sign up for our prayer updates. I send an update every week to let you know how you can be praying for us. If you would rather sign up with a pen and paper, I have that in the fellowship hall as well. Please sign up for our prayer updates. It's really an encouragement for us. Let me pray. Father God, I'm so grateful that you are a God who is inviting us to be present in the communities that you have placed us. Thanks, God, that the invitation to serve you is something that is an invitation for all of us. Lord, that in the economy of heaven, there are not good servants and bad servants based on location or calling. But in the economy of heaven, you've called us all to be your witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. And so, Lord, please guide us and help us know how to pitch our tents in our community, to build relationships with the people around us, to invite them into a deeper relationship with us, and through the relationship with us, really, Lord, to a deeper relationship with you. Father, thanks that you love the people of Battle Lake, you love the people of Berlin, and that your desire is to see them in relationship with you. And you've asked us to be a part of that. Give us guidance and wisdom and clear and easy steps for our own lives. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.